Thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. And for those of you who actually attended the SAT one last week, it's going to be a lot of the same strategy about testing. But the reason why these are so popular is it just creates anxiety for everybody. These tests, these high stakes standardized exams that play a role in college admission. So what I'm going to go through today is just some tips and some strategies, and then open it up some questions at the end. So we'll be done within the hour. Um, as far as me, here's who I am. You can kind of look at my background. I've been teaching for a long time and helping students and families out with college admissions and teaching the actual SAT and ACT. But I'm going to point out here my email address. If you do have additional questions after tonight, you can shoot me an email at anthonyr@review.com or give me a call. Here's my phone number here. If you want to follow up with me, feel free to do that. With that said, here's my agenda. But what I'm going to tell you, the workshop is not an end-all, be-all for test prep. For those of you taking your ACT coming up next month or the end of this month, it's really not meant for that. It's not meant for you to get 10 more points on the ACT. What I want to do is introduce you to the ACT and how to think about these standardized exams and how to get yourself ready for that. So if you were coming tonight thinking, oh, I'm taking the test soon and I need this workshop, that's not what this workshop's about. So it's kind of a precursor to your prep needs, and you need to find that out. And so that's kind of what I want to do tonight. So with that said, we can go over the background of the ACT, but I'm not going to do that. You can look that up on the ACT website or Princeton.com. It's offered multiple times a year. There's different sections. The scoring is out of 36. There's a math section, a science section. You can learn all that by reading about that. I want to get into the nitty-gritty of how the test is written, what kind of information you're going to need to succeed on the ACT, and that's what we're going to spend our time on. So I'm going to skip through this. The one good thing about the ACT versus the SAT that I like is that you get big chunks of the section. For example, the reading section, you get it all in one swoop. On the SAT, you actually have 3 math sections, you have 3 reading sections, and you have 3 writing sections, and then 1 experimental. On the ACT, you get all the reading at once, and that's it, and then you're done with it. You get the math once, and you're done with it. So that's actually an advantage of the ACT over the SAT, if you didn't know. So what are the misconceptions about these standardized exams? Now, if you heard me last week on the SAT call, it's a lot of the same thing. So a lot of my topics will be similar, but it never hurts to hear them again. But some of the misconceptions are that these scores measure your intelligence, that if you have a high GPA, you're going to ace the ACT. Not always the case. That wasn't me. You can't learn to increase your scores, or test scores are not as important. Well, those are, again, they're misconceptions. What I want to do is talk to you about what are the truths about these. And some of the truths are that it does not measure your intelligence, and you can coach to a better score. How do I know? I've actually done it. I help students every year on the SAT or ACT improve their scores. So it's really important to understand that you're not stuck with the score you got on a practice test, or if you've taken it before. That's not the score you can end up with. So you can be coached to have a better score. And GPA is still the most important in your admissions process and your application. So don't think, oh, I have a bad test score, I'm not going to go to college. Your grades and your curriculum are still the predominant factor in admissions. So that's really important for you to understand, that the test scores are just one piece of the puzzle. Okay? So with that said, let's talk about that puzzle. What goes into a college application? And what I like to do is paint that picture so you understand. Hopefully what it'll do is lessen the pressure on you that your test scores are only one piece of the bigger puzzle. So here are your test scores here. Well, they still look at your transcript, your outside activities, other things you do. But the test scores, which is the one that most people freak out about, are just one piece of that. So I want you to understand that. Hopefully that will lessen your anxiety as you approach these exams. So I'm going to talk about 5 things tonight. Here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is a teaser slide. These are the 5 things I'm going to cover. I'll come back to exactly what they are in a moment. So let's talk about that first tip that I want to tell you guys about. And the first one is just understanding or knowing thy enemy. And the enemy is not Princeton Review. We help you. It's the people who write these exams. So the more you know about them and how they write this exam, the better you're going to do. So you need to understand how they write it, what kinds of questions are given, the content that's tested. For example, if you're taking the math, well, the difference between the math on the SAT and ACT is different. So you need to understand, well, it's not fully different, but that the ACT math covers a higher level. There might be some trigonometry on it. On the SAT, there's not. That there's geometry and ratios and algebra. You need to understand that's the content that's covered. And how is it formatted? What's the scoring? Where's the difficulty of the questions? Can you find them? How predictable is it? And so if you know the enemy that way, it's going to help you. Just like you take your school test, when your math teacher is giving you a test, partial credit. So that partial credit, you'll do the work actually. So timing. Okay, you need to understand that on an ACT, it's designed so you can't finish. Okay, on a high school exam, your teachers want you to finish. They want to test what you know. On the ACT, the answer choices can be tricky. The science section, you don't really need a lot of science. It's more reading required. The math comprises more than 4 years of math, while in school, it only comprises 1 year, and it's very focused. So it's important that you understand it is a different test. It's a different animal. The way you prepare for a high school test might be a little different than the way you're going to prepare for the ACT. So let's get into that. But before we do that, let me kind of take you through a little exercise I like to do. It's just a word association exercise to get us a sense of how these test writers are thinking. And if you've done this before with me, then you don't need to participate. So I'm going to say a word, or going to show a word on the screen, and I want you to chat in a word in the chat area, the first word that comes to your mind or that you think of. Okay, here's the first word, peanut butter.
Jelly, 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 bread, jelly, allergies, yummy, jelly, jelly, bread, jelly, jelly, apple, jelly, jelly, bread, sandwich, sandwich, jelly, 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 jelly.
All right, here's the next one. Boy.
Girl, girl, you, guy, sport, girl, girl, man, girl, girl, immature, human, immature, girl, 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 man, person, girl.
Great. All right, now at this time, think of a number, any number.
2, 7, 11, 7, 19, negative 5, 7, 7, 25, 47, 7, 23, 3, 19, 200, 15, 5, 12, 4.
Okay, perfect. So again, I made these slides previously before the session, and most of you said jelly or bread, and a lot of you said girl. My favorite answer, of course, is you say boy, and the girls say immature. Hopefully it's not a boy saying that, but it could be. So what this shows, and hopefully it's going to show you that, is that we're all very predictable. Okay, and then in terms of picking a number, I only heard one negative number, but maybe they showed up to my last session because I did this exercise with them. But most people are picking normal numbers. They're not picking, 2,474. They're picking a decimal. It's because we're very predictable, and there's nothing wrong with being predictable. The only problem is on some of these high stakes tests like the ACT and the SAT is that they use that predictability to help confuse you. And so sometimes we just have to be aware of that stuff on an exam like this. It's not as straightforward as your high school exam. The teachers aren't trying to trick you. On a standardized test like this, they need that bell-shaped curve where some people do well, really well, some people do really poorly, and then most of the people fall right in the middle. The only way to do that is to have questions set up where there's some easy, some medium, some hard questions, and they know what you're going to answer before you answer it already. Now, you might not understand that right now, but as I talk through it more, hopefully you'll kind of understand that. So, with that said, I just want you to be kind of mindful that these test writers know a lot of times what you're going to answer ahead of time. Another tip that I work with my students on is kind of taking the test on your own terms. And that's hard for a lot of students because they're used to, and they grow up in the school system where it teach you to take the test on the school's terms. Or on the teacher's terms, not on your terms. So you need to understand your personality when you're testing. You need to understand how to manage your own test, how you study well, what works for you. Like for whatever reason, I like to study with music on. I don't like when it's quiet. That works for me. Doesn't work for somebody else. How to pace yourself. When I manage a test, I do a pass system where I go through all the questions. I put question marks in some of them, and they come back, and I do the ones I had question marks on. But that's the way I take a test. So I manage my test differently than somebody else. And you need to have your own way that you manage your tests. And I'll show you one example on the ACT. For example, on the ACT math, okay, here's where all the easy questions are. They're in the beginning. So you have a math section from 1 to 60. Well, a lot of students, what ends up happening is they rush all the way through to get through to number 6, up to the hard questions, and they rush on the easy ones, and they get a lot of these easy ones wrong because they're rushing to finish the section. Okay, when somebody sees 60 questions, 60 minutes, most people think in their head, I got a minute per question. Well, that shouldn't really be the case for you as a tester. If that's the way you think, it's going to hurt you as a tester. So you need to slow down. You need to, what we call, follow your own personal order of difficulty. That's what POOD means, personal order of difficulty. If you hate geometry and you're not very good at geometry, well then maybe you should skip those geometry questions and do the algebra ones because you're better at those. And that's personal order of difficulty. So when we're used to doing question number 1, then number 2, then number 3, then number 4, number 5, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be, okay, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, then I'll do number 7 because it has a question that I like better. The same with the reading section of the ACT. Do the passage you like best first. That's going to help you down. So again, that's taking it under your own terms. And then you have this, what we call now, later, and never. For example, by the way, the ACT is from 1 to 36. So let's just say you were scoring a 15 on the math, and you were my student. I'd never have you do any of these questions down here. Because what happens is you'll do all 60 and maybe you get 20 right because you're spending a lot of time on the hard questions. What I'd rather do is slow you down and do only 30 questions. I'd rather you get all 30 questions right and be more accurate, and then you'll get a better score. So if you're scoring in the 15 to 20 range, you shouldn't even be attempting every single question. That's going to hurt you, okay? So that's the idea of what we call pacing. And every student is going to be a little different in their pacing plan based on what strengths and weaknesses they have. So you need to find a plan for yourself. And this is one of the biggest things in testing that students do not take advantage of. They don't take into account their own personal or a personal approach. You need your own plan. And it might be different from math to the other sections based on what your strengths and weaknesses are. So again, that's taking the test on your own terms. Um, I'm going to skip through this and talk about just about guessing, which is another strategy. Most people don't take guessing as a strategy, but it is on these standardized exams like the SAT and ACT. So what do you do if you don't know the answer? And should you guess? And it's not really a skill you learn in school. So what do you do? So let's take it, for example, let's take a look at some questions. So let's just say you didn't even know what the question was. How many of you would you guess on number 1, 2, or 3? So why don't you chat that in there to me if you were going to guess, and which ones would you guess on? And you might say none, you might say all, you might say number 1 only or number 2 only, 1 and 2 only. So which ones would you guess on? And we're going to answer that question that's in the chat. You don't get penalized for ACT. You heard that you don't. Well, let's do this and we'll get to that answer in a second.
3, 1, all of them. 3, 2 and 3, 2 and 3, all of them.
So we have a bunch of different answers here, and that's part of the reason we have a bunch of different answers is not everybody understands how it works. And that's the important thing about whatever test you take, whether it's ACT, the subject test, SAT, your school test, you need to how to understand the format of the exam and how it's scored. So if you didn't know, and a lot of you sound like you knew, yeah, on the ACT, you don't get penalized for getting something wrong. If you get it right, you get a raw point, 1 point. If you leave it blank or get it wrong, nothing happens. So for an ACT, you should never leave anything blank. Okay, so take that in. That's really important. A lot of people I've seen take ACTs and they leave questions blank. Shouldn't happen. Okay, I'm going to go back here for a second and say this LOTD, that means letter of the day. So if there's 30 seconds to go and you haven't even attempted these questions down here, well then pick something. I would do A. That's my letter of the day. I go in that because my name is Anthony, so I don't forget my letter of the day. It's always A. And I would just put A for all of them when I had 30 seconds to go. Because on an ACT, you don't lose any points. Again, this ties into with your pacing though. If you're scoring a low math score, you shouldn't even be attempting these questions. So if you were only doing the first 40 questions for your pacing, well then when it was 10 seconds to go, then you would just put A. You wouldn't even attempt these questions, but you would put an answer. And that's how you work the test. So that's how guessing works on an ACT. You should always guess. Doesn't mean you should always answer every question or attempt every question. Sometimes you should just put letter of the day because you're not attempting that question. So that's guessing, and that is a strategy as well. So here's a couple strategies that go with it. If you're answering questions and you can eliminate something, cross a line through it. Be aggressive. Never leave something blank. Don't flip a coin because it takes too long. You don't have the time. Use letter of the day. And use your personal order of difficulty. So do the easy now, and you're either not going to attempt the difficult at all, or you're going to save them for later if you're trying to score 30 plus. So based on your goals will be determined if you answer all the questions or you attempt all the questions or not. Okay, and that's really an important issue with testing like this. Okay, so here's a math problem, and I'm going to put it on the board here, and I want you to take a look at it and think about how you solve it. I'm going to walk you through the problem in a minute or so. I'm going to give you some time to take a look at it. If you have an answer, feel free to chat it in. If you want to put an answer in, that's fine by me, but I'm still going to walk you through the problem. So the first thing we're going to do is rephrase it or look at it in our own words. And so when we do that, it's really find the area of the square and subtract the area of the circle. That's all we're doing. Okay, and this is what sometimes make these tests hard, is the way it's written or the way the word problem is. Well, this is a lot easier to understand than reading this whole thing up here. So sometimes you got to understand how the questions are given and what they're really looking for. So if we do this and find the area of the square minus the area of the circle, Rob, did we get any answers, by the way? Anybody throw out some answers?
Yep, mostly B's.
Okay, perfect. So most of you are getting the answer, but what I wanted to show you guys is a couple things. Is when you work the problems, first we need to understand, was that easy, medium, or difficult? So that's actually a medium question because it's only number 40. So once we label it what type of question it is, it'll help give us some insight of what we need to do. If it's a medium question, a lot of times there's more than one step. If it was an easy one, they would just probably say, what is the area of the circle with a radius of 5 or something? But now that we put the formulas, or actually once we get what we want to do and put some formulas in place, so the area of the square is that formula, and the area of the circle is that formula. The other thing that I teach my students is you need to label everything. So here I am labeling things. Now, once I get the labeling done and the formulas down, it's really simple. It becomes something of a matter of process elimination. Well, we know it's not going to be 10 with nothing squared over here because of the formulas and the numbers that we have. So it couldn't be this, it couldn't be this or this. So we're crossing out all the answers here. Now we're left with A and B, and that's what we call process elimination. That's another way to help you get to the answer choice. Now some of you got the answer already. The other thing to note is we didn't really need to actually solve for it. We just needed to set it up, and that's another big mistake students make, is they actually full-on solve for the answer when all you needed to do here was actually find the formula, really, and fill in the formula. So you don't have to solve it if you don't have to. Okay, so that's one thing to know. Now you go, oh, that was an easy problem, Anthony. Well, okay, great, it was an easy problem, but sometimes, again, that extra 30 seconds you try to solve it is 30 seconds you don't have on another problem. So if you don't have to figure out the answer from scratch, don't. And use your logic to help you eliminate. So let's take some more math concepts here. So here's a question, and if you've seen it before, don't answer, please. But the number 0, is it A, B, C, D, or E? And chat that in for me.
Hey, Anthony, there are a lot of questions about formulas. Does the ACT provide those formulas for you? Hello?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you'll have some formulas available to you. So but not all of them. But they're easy formulas. So
Most people say neither. C.
all right. And here's the next question. Is 0 positive, negative, neither?
Oh yeah, a lot of C's here.
Okay. Well, and this is where the test, they know and it's predictable, but everybody picks C for the first one. 0 is actually even, and 0 is also neither. So you got one of 2 correct. Now, they don't just ask you that straightforward, but they actually put it in a problem. How many distinct even integers are the number, and they give you a number. But if you don't know what distinct means, or you don't know that 0 is even, or you don't know things like prime numbers, you're going to get things wrong, and that's where they get you. And part of this is understanding that first C, when I said those 5 things, is content. You need to understand what content is tested. So there's fundamental math vocabulary, like prime numbers. 1 is not prime, 2 is the only even prime. If you don't know those things, you're going to lose points. You're not going to get those answers correct. So as simple as 0 being even, we had that a long time ago, but a lot of times we forget it. And that's what content is about. You need to understand the content. And here's some of the content you're going to see on it. But you can look all that up. So you have trigonometry, some geometry, pre-algebra, ratios, averages, proportions, things like that. The other thing you're going to need besides content, we already talked about some of it. It includes guessing, pacing, personal order of difficulty. That's called strategy, and that's how you approach the test. And at Princeton U, people know Princeton U for showing a lot of great strategy. The other thing they know us for is the third thing, which is technique. These are step-by-step methods for solving specific problem types. You need a game plan for the English, the math, the reading, the science, and that's actually how you do certain types of problems. So, for example, here's another math problem. And I have a little time, so we'll do this one to kind of show you a technique that we have. So take a look at it. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to try it. And while you guys are trying it, I'd love for you to chat in either one, the answer to the problem, or two, what type of problem is it? What type of math problem is it? Is it geometry? You know, that type of stuff. So what type of problem is it, and how would you do it? And then I'm going to show you our technique, the Princeton review technique for solving this type of math problem.
Algebra, and most people are answering, it's close, it's between B and E, but I think E is getting more.
Great. So let's attack this problem. First thing, all my math students we look at, oh, it's a number 35. So it's a medium problem moving towards the hard range. That means there's probably going to be a couple steps. It's not going to be that straightforward. Yes, it's an algebra problem, but number two is it's also an average problem. So it's an average and algebra problem. That clues my students into a couple things. So we learn to recognize it's a problem, and then once I know it's an average and an algebra problem, I know what techniques I'm supposed to use. I'm used to use a plug-in technique. So with plug-in, I hate algebra. At Princeton U, we don't teach algebra. Well, what we do is simple arithmetic here. So instead of using n or t's or s's, we're going to pick a number for n. So Amy received an average score of n. What plugging in is we're going to pick a number for n. So let's just say n is 8. So I'm making n 8. That's what plugging in is. The other technique that we would teach at Princeton Review is what we call an average wheel. This is what an average wheel looks like. You got the total on the top, the number of things over here, and the actual average over here. And so it looks like, oh, there's a lot of work to create this problem, but it makes it so much easier. So, you know, some of my students who are very good at it, they don't necessarily make the whole circle, but they do something like that. But some of them, if you want, when they're first starting out, they make a wheel. So we want to fill in this wheel. So we know the average now. We're making it 8. So here we go. Let's do our first wheel here. If there are 4 tests, so we do the first, we take it in small pieces. So first 4 tests, so here's 4 tests. We made the n 8. That means the total is 32. Now let's take the second part of the question. Well, now we need, on her 5th test, she exceeds her previous average. So we're actually, because it's 2-parter, we got to make another average wheel. Again, now, when you get good at this stuff, it becomes second nature. I'm explaining it to you, so it just looks like it would take a long time. This problem would take me about 20 to 30 seconds. That's about it, because I'm, you know, very good at average wheels and all that stuff. So here comes the next wheel. Now on the 5th test, so there's going to be 5 things. She exceeds her previous average by 20. So they want to know, the answers represent what is her average for the 5 tests. So we have to find this thing in here. Well, in order to find that thing, we need to find the total first. The way we find the total then is she exceeds her previous average by 20 points. So it's 20 points plus the average that we had originally. So that's plus 28. We now have 60 in here. That means my average is going to be 12. We call that our target. So we go back to the answer choices now. With our target, we plug in for n, which is 8, and we're looking for the answer 12. So those of you picked E, that is not correct. We're finding 12 right there. So those of you who picked B, congratulations. I don't know how you actually did it, but as the questions, if this was a number 50 problem, I'm telling you, you don't want to use algebra. You'd rather use plugging in. And using these average wheels are going to make it a lot easier. So that's what we call a technique. Because of time, and as I told you, this isn't fully a test prep session, but just getting you thinking about things. Um, that's an example of how we would teach a math technique. Now, there's a lot of other techniques we would teach you on all different sections of the test, but I'm not going to go through all that because of time. So let's kind of skip over to another section, like something like English, and just kind of point out a few things. On the English questions, it's really important to understand the context of the sentence. So here's an example of if we were to look at the underline here, and the answer choices, we really wouldn't know what the answer would be. And that's why it's important when you're doing an English question that you look at the full context of it. So we need to keep it consistent. When we look at the context of the underlined word, we will see that his research will define, the scientist will become. So when we talk about English questions, you've got to keep it consistent and simple, and you'll find out, oh, it took away my underlining, that you got to keep it consistent and you've got to use the context of the paragraph here. So that happens on English. But for a lot of you, the English is going to have a lot of grammar on it, and they have a lot of evil ACT tricks on the grammar portion. And we talked about being predictable. They know, for example, that when people read this, only one of the juniors are going to the prom, they're going to go, that is correct. Because the ACT knows that you see the word juniors and you go, oh, that's plural, that should go with are. But they don't realize, or students don't realize, that are is incorrect because of the juniors is in the preposition. You're actually looking at only one goes with the word are. So that needs to be is. And so this would be wrong. The senior class is not have, would be has. So these are some just evil tricks by the ACT. Again, because of time, I'm not going to go into them, but one of the things we do at Princeton Review, or if you're prepping on your own or whatever you got to do, is understand what are the rules of grammar they're going to test. It's limited, so I've got to learn those. Again, that goes back to content. And how do they put it in a problem, and how do I solve it? That goes to strategy and technique. But once you learn some of these tricks, then you know what to be focusing on. And a lot of focus goes on to these 5 things: verbs, pronouns, apostrophes, transitions, and being concise. That means they don't want an answer choice that's very wordy. Okay. The reading, we'll skip that. The science, people always ask me about the science, so I'll give you one little comment and then we'll open up to questions pretty soon. It's a very low-scoring section, but it's very low-scoring because people are almost intimidated by this section. Another reason why a lot of people go to the SAT, they go, I don't want science, but you don't really need the knowledge of science so much. It's really reading about science passages. And there's 3 types. There's these charts and graphs, experiments, and fighting scientists. Okay, but it's really looking at the data. It's looking about finding trends and relationships within the passages. So let me show you an example here. So here is a question, and here's those 2 questions that go with this kind of this chart or experiment, if you want to call it. So if you take a look at it, and it just looks overwhelming, you go, ah, my God, I haven't done this in a while. But really, when you look at the question, they're talking about trends with pH and depth. So when we look at pH and depth, again, I'm going through this fast, guys. I wouldn't do this fast in a class. We would spend, on science alone, a whole class day on it. But when we look at the trends, you'll see that the depth is going from 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. It's going up 5 every time. And the pH, so the next one would be 25. The pH is going down by 0.5. So the next one at a depth of 25 would be 4.5. So it's really just reading the chart and finding that trend. So there's all this stuff in there that just looks so overwhelming, but when you really look at it, it's really simple. I love these type of passages. It's really finding the answer. Being an archaeologist here, okay, great, let me find out where do I got to look. And then in question number 2, they're looking at the concentration of gases here that is constant. So now we're looking at the concentration here. So we got to look here, something for being constant. And when we look at something being constant, we find that, there we go, O2. That's the constant from depth of 10 or more, which is going here. Look, it's 0, 0, and 0. So really, the science is really not that hard. It's very coachable, and you're definitely able to prepare for it. So with that said, I'm going to skip through that and kind of get back to the next thing in the 5 pieces. So we had content. To be successful on ACT, you need content, you need strategy, you need technique, and here's the 4th thing. You need lots of practice, practice, practice. That's the triple P. And analysis. So you got to take a lot of practice tests. So if you guys are taking the test next month, and if you haven't taken a practice test, you're putting yourself at disadvantage. By taking more practice exams, you're going to increase your confidence, you're going to lower your anxiety, you're going to improve your accuracy, you can work on some of these strategies and methods that are going to help you. And you work on your timing and your pacing. If you've never taken a practice test, oh, there's a group of people not happy with the SAT. They're barking at the SAT, so those are just doggies, don't worry about them. Take a look over here. You could take a free practice test. At Practice ACT, you can visit us at one of our locations or one of our test days. Maybe your school's hosting one, or you can actually take one online. That's how you're going to give you a sense of how you're going to score in an ACT if you haven't taken one yet. So I highly encourage you to do that. And then what we do is we give you a score report that tells you how well you did. It breaks you down in different questions. You can find out all the correct answers. So here's really the 5 things that are going to help you succeed on the ACT. So that 5th one is just that endurance and confidence by doing multiple practice tests. So if you guys are taking the test next month and you haven't developed a game plan, you don't have any strategies or techniques, there's no point in going and taking the test. You're not going to do well. I mean, unless you're brilliant and you know you're going to score well. But for most of us, that's not the case. You need to practice and get ready for it. You know, you got to go in and be ready for it. It's a different type of test than you're used to. Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about for those that are juniors now, I would consider taking the ACT maybe this fall, at the latest in the spring, because you maybe want a second time at it before you apply to colleges. If you're a senior, this is it. This is it. If you're a sophomore, probably preparing next summer would be ideal. And then as far as should you prep, how long should you prep, that really goes into where you're starting at. So find the school you're interested in, find your goal. Whatever your goal is, let's just say your goal happens to be 31 because you want to go to a really good school. And maybe your practice test score is a 25. 6 points, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a huge gap. You're probably going to need 2 to 3 months to get ready for the ACT. That's just how it is. And that 6 points is probably going to require some type of formal preparation, not buying a book. If you are at 30, then I would say, well, maybe you buy a book and you get there. So that's kind of how you plan it out for yourself. For those you don't know where you're starting at, then take a practice test, because that's a mistake, going in and not knowing. It's almost going blind into a test. You should know what you'll be scoring before you go in there. And if it's not where you want to be, then you shouldn't be going in and taking it. Okay, so with that said, obviously Princeton Review, we run classes, and you can look about all the things we do and what we offer on our website at princeview.com. For attending tonight, I do have a special offer for you. You'll get that information in the follow-up email that we send out to you with the recording, but we're offering a discount for you that you can go to our website and use one of these promo codes. You can email me, give me a call, or call one of our advisors over here, and kind of see if you need some help. Again, it really is going to depend on your goal and where you're starting at. So take a practice test, and other than that, somebody asked for it before. Here's my information if you want to reach out to me after this session alone. But Rob, I think that'll do it. I can open it up for questions right now. So we have about 15 minutes worth of questions.
Yeah, let's do it. So any questions, folks, fire away. We have a couple already. Can you talk a bit, Anthony, about the SAT versus the ACT, and more specifically, how a student should determine which one they should take? Should they try both? Should they take practice tests first and see which one they do better? And if they do the same, is there one they should favor over the other?
I mean, I get that question a lot. It's a great question. For those of you, and this is, again, part of the strategy too when you take these tests is also timing of everything. For those that are seniors now, it's kind of late for you to determine which one you're better suited for. So whichever one you've been prepping and taking, you should stay with that one because you're familiar with it. If you're younger, you have some time to figure it out. There are different exams. The SAT is more vocabulary based. The ACT has science, a science passage on it. So so based on what your weaknesses are, it's going to be different. As ACT math goes to a higher level, SAT there's 3. So it's just set up differently. So it's really, you're going to want to do some research. If you go to princetonreview.com/, so go to our website /SAT dash, sorry, it's not very neat, ACT. There's a bunch of things that are kind of just will ask you some questions or give you some insight into the differences. So if you're not a vocabulary person, then maybe the ACT because it's more grammar based. The SAT, as I said, is trickier. There's also on the ACT there's no guessing penalty. On the SAT there is. Some people don't like that about that. So you lose 1/4 of a point on the SAT. So there's the form. You should probably learn. What my suggestion would be is to learn about both exams and see which one you feel more comfortable with. The other thing you have is you can take practice tests from Princeton Review of an SAT or an ACT and see which one you better score on, because I have the conversion chart. Or we have an exam called the PRA, Princeton Review Assessment. It's getting a new name coming out here, but you'll be able to and it'll have SAT and ACT within that exam. We're the only company that has that. And so that's actually going to be released. Well, we actually have one now, and we're getting a new one as well. And you can take one of those, and we'll determine which one you're better at. So if you can, take one of these PRAs. If you go to our website, princetonreview.com, and go to events, you can take a practice test, one of those being the PRA. So that would be another thing I would recommend, Rob, is that they take one of these PRAs if they want to actually determine it. But some people know it ahead of time. They kind of go, I feel better with an ACT because it does this, this, and this. So either go to our website to learn more or take a PRA.
Regarding the science section, do you recommend a student looks at the essay or the sentences paragraph before the chart or graph, or should they go straight to the chart and graph first and then try and find the essay in the paragraph?
It really depends on what kind of chart or graph it is and everything. So it's hard to give one blanket statement. Um, for that particular person who asked the question, uh, you're going to want to take a test and see how you do and what you struggle with. And some of my students, um, you know, they'll jump to the questions and kind of see, and some will give a kind of a quick overview of it. So I have students do different things, but for the most part, it's especially with the charts and graphs, a lot of it is superfluous. You don't need that. So typically, it's not a good idea to spend so much time um, going through it, with a fine-tooth comb, because really you might not need all of it. As I showed you in that one example of one problem, we didn't need the majority of it. We only looked at a couple pieces of it. So all I would say is get familiar with it and kind of see what's going to work best for you. I don't want to give you a blanket statement, but for the most part, you don't need most of it. So you got to just know where to look, and it's just going to take practice.
How about the essay? Can you talk about the essay a little bit? And we have a student asking if it's optional, and if so, do they really need to fill out the essay or complete the essay or not?
Yeah, well, it is optional. A lot of competitive schools will require it. So for some people, that's why maybe an SAT works, because it has the essay within it. And sometimes the optional SAT, ACT essay, they might, may or may want to do, but your schools you're applying to will probably determine whether you take it or not. So I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's kind of, it's not part of the composite score on the ACT. But what I can say is very coachable. You need to have a certain structure, certain types of paragraphs. You can learn a lot about what you need to write before you go in and even know the topic. So it's very coachable. As with the SAT essay, they're both very, very coachable. So probably one of the easier parts to improve upon. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. But if you don't know what school you want to go to and you want to keep your options open, then if you're going to take the ACT, I recommend taking it with the essay so you don't have to go back and have to take it. If you know where you want to go and it doesn't require it, then don't take it. So.
Anthony, any tips for relieving test taking anxiety?
Well, I said it before, test-taking anxiety, one of the things, number 4 and number 5, more practice will lower your anxiety. It's just in sports or anything that you do that before if you're putting on a concert or you're going to be on stage and you're acting in a play or something, the more practice you do before you get on stage, it's going to lower your anxiety. Now, you'll always still probably have something in your belly no matter what, but, as with athletes who practice day in, day out before game day, it's all about the practice. That's going to lower your test anxiety. So if at all, you need to take multiple exams under timed conditions. That's going to build up your confidence and endurance. It's going to lower your anxiety. It's going to help you know what you need to work on. And that in itself is going to kind of make it disappear. Now, if you don't learn some strategy and technique along the way and you don't know how to do an average or a ratio or geometry, then you're going to struggle. So you need to have that content as a base. If you don't, you're going to have anxiety no matter what.